Long before the Genesis we know, there are whispers of a sacred scroll that was unlike anything ever seen. This ancient manuscript was said to hold the original account of creation, a version so powerful that it revealed truths mankind was never meant to see. Unlike the Genesis we have today, it supposedly told the full story of beings who walked the heavens, of worlds that existed before ours, and of events erased from memory. But that scroll was burned, leaving behind only fragments and rumors, buried in forgotten texts. Some early Jewish traditions and apocryphal writings mention a scroll of origins. It was believed to be older than the Torah, carrying details too dangerous for humanity. The scroll allegedly described celestial wars before the creation of man, and even the role of mysterious beings who assisted God or opposed him in shaping the early universe. But why would such a divine record be destroyed? Who had the power or the reason to erase it from existence? Clues appear in fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls and in writings banned from the biblical canon. They speak of the Chronicle of the First Earth, the Book of the Sons of Heaven, and the Light Before the World. Scholars have long debated whether these titles refer to lost writings connected to a greater Genesis story. If so, this missing scroll might have contained knowledge that would change everything we know about creation and about God's first dealings with his heavenly hosts. The destruction of such a scroll would not have been accidental. Powerful leaders, priests, kings, even prophets may have agreed that humanity was not ready to understand what was written inside. Some ancient rabbis hinted that certain truths were too overwhelming, truths that could shake faith and authority if ever revealed. Could it be that this scroll told a version of Genesis that contradicted what we know today? And if so, what terrifying reality did it describe about the beginning of everything? If this scroll truly existed, its contents must have been extraordinary. Imagine a text that described not only how the heavens and the earth were formed, but also who was present when the foundations of reality were laid. It may have spoken of angelic beings, ancient councils, and decisions made long before Adam ever took his first breath. Such revelations could have challenged the way humans understood God, authority, and even their own purpose in creation. For those in power, this knowledge might have been seen as too dangerous to be preserved. Several early Christian fathers hinted at books and scrolls that were deliberately excluded from Scripture. Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and even Irenaeus wrote about texts that circulated in the early centuries, some of which were considered too controversial or heretical. Among these were writings about pre-Adamic worlds, celestial hierarchies, and the rebellion of beings older than humanity. Could these banned books have contained fragments of the burned scroll? And if they did, why were they so feared? And if this truth burns in your heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. Be part of this mission to uncover what history tried to erase forever. The mystery deepens when we consider how meticulously certain texts were copied, while others vanished completely. It suggests intentional suppression, not mere chance. The elders of Israel, the scribes or later church councils, could have decided that revealing the full Genesis would endanger the faith of the people. After all, what would happen if humanity learned that before Adam there had been other creations, other beings, and even other worlds that were judged and destroyed? Such knowledge could shake the very foundation of belief as we know it. Some scholars point out that hints of this lost knowledge appear in the Book of Jubilees and in fragments of Vor Enoch. These writings speak of events that happened before the days of Adam, of angelic beings who descended to earth, and of a heavenly order that existed long before humanity. If these texts are pieces of a greater whole, then the burned scroll could have been the original source from which many apocryphal books drew their ideas. But because it revealed too much, it may have been condemned as dangerous and erased from history. by those who feared its power. Ancient rabbis sometimes debated whether the Torah we have today was complete. There are stories suggesting that Moses himself may have received more revelations than what was recorded. Some traditions even claim that he was shown a book of heaven that described not just Israel's destiny, but the secrets of creation and the fate of other worlds. If these accounts hold any truth, it is possible that parts of this heavenly book were intentionally kept hidden, leaving us only with the version of Genesis that leaders wanted preserved. What makes this mystery even deeper is the consistency of references across multiple ancient sources. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, mention the Book of the Wars of God and the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries. Both texts describe realities and events never seen in our current scriptures. Could these be fragments of the burned Genesis scroll? If so, then the story we have in the Bible might only be a portion of a far greater narrative, one that includes the rise and fall of celestial beings before humanity ever existed. The idea of a destroyed scroll raises disturbing questions. Was this act of destruction carried out to protect mankind from knowledge too great to bear? Or was it a deliberate attempt to control what future generations would believe about their own origins? If the scroll revealed that other beings once inhabited the earth, that God judged entire worlds before Adam, and that heaven itself was once divided, then its existence would completely transform how we see creation, sin, and even redemption. Throughout history, there have always been whispers of hidden books that the religious authorities chose to suppress. Early church councils decided which writings would become part of the biblical canon, while many others were labeled heretical and destroyed. But what if some of these writings were not heresy at all, but pieces of that original scroll? A scroll that spoke openly of God's dealings with angelic hosts, of a divine rebellion older than Lucifer, and of a forgotten earth judged before ours. The decision to burn it might have been less about protecting truth and more about controlling it. The implications of this are enormous. If there really was a more complete Genesis, then humanity has been reading only part of the story for thousands of years. The version we know could be a carefully edited account, true but incomplete. It may hide the reality that creation was far more complex, involving beings and events we cannot imagine. And perhaps this truth was feared because it would make mankind question everything about God's justice, mercy, and the purpose of humanity itself. In apocryphal texts, we find glimpses of a past where celestial beings were deeply involved in shaping early creation. Some writings speak of watchers who guided or corrupted humanity, while others mention heavenly councils that debated mankind's future. These fragments suggest that the Genesis we know was stripped of much of its cosmic drama. If a scroll once existed that told the full version, its burning would represent one of the greatest acts of censorship in spiritual history. And yet, the persistence of these references across cultures hints that the knowledge could never be fully erased. Oral traditions, forbidden writings, and mysterious fragments all point toward a truth that refuses to die. The burned scroll may have been destroyed physically, but echoes of its words remain scattered through time, waiting to be pieced together. Those who seek these fragments are left asking a chilling question. What truth was so explosive that it had to be burned to ashes? Some theologians have proposed that the burned scroll might have contained details about the first rebellion in heaven, an event far more ancient than the fall of Lucifer. If true, it could mean that the struggle between light and darkness began long before humanity was created. The scroll might have described how God judged an entire order of beings, erasing their history from existence. Such a revelation would deeply challenge the narrative that Genesis is the absolute beginning of everything, instead showing it as only the latest chapter in a much older story. The Book of Jubilees hints that angels played a key role in transmitting knowledge to early humans. But what if this knowledge had originally been far greater, detailing events from before the earth itself was formed? The burned scroll could have contained information about divine councils, heavenly laws, and even civilizations that lived under God's rule before being destroyed. Understanding these details would radically change how we see God's justice, His patience, and His long history with creation. Some scholars argue that early religious leaders feared that such revelations would lead people to doubt their faith. If humanity knew that there had been previous worlds judged by God, it might lead them to question His fairness or even their own importance. For that reason, the scroll might have been deliberately erased from memory, replaced by a version of Genesis that focused solely on mankind's story. But small hints of that greater reality still slip through, preserved in fragments and forgotten texts. Even today, researchers who study ancient manuscripts find puzzling references to lost books of Moses, hidden words of Enoch, and scrolls of the first light. None of these writings survived in full, yet their existence suggests that a broader and more mysterious history once circulated among believers. If these pieces all came from the same original scroll, then its destruction was not just a loss of knowledge, it was a deliberate act to keep humanity in the dark about its true origins. This possibility raises profound questions about divine revelation itself. Was humanity truly given the whole truth about creation, or only the part that God, or perhaps human leaders, believed they could handle? The burned scroll could have been considered too dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was too true. It may have contained details about beings who shared in God's creative work, cosmic battles fought long before Eden, and secrets about why this world was chosen to exist, while others were erased. If such a scroll existed, who decided to destroy it? Was it the elders of Israel seeking to preserve unity and control over the sacred texts? Or was it an act of divine will, where God Himself ensured that certain knowledge would remain hidden until the appointed time? This tension between divine secrecy and human censorship makes the story of the burned scroll even more compelling. It leaves us wondering whether the truth was protected or stolen from future generations. The silence of Scripture about these possible earlier worlds may itself be a clue. Why does Genesis begin so abruptly, with no explanation of what came before, in the beginning? Why are there hints of chaos, darkness, and deep waters already present before God begins to create? Some theologians believe these verses are remnants of a larger narrative that once existed in the burned scroll. If that is true, then our Bible begins in the middle of a story whose first chapters were intentionally erased. This would mean that the Genesis we know is not a lie, but an incomplete truth. It tells of our creation and our purpose, but not of what came before. Understanding what was lost in the burned scroll could completely reshape how we view God's plan for history, His relationship with other beings, and even the final destiny of creation. The existence of such a scroll, even as a possibility, challenges us to confront the reality that not everything has been revealed, and perhaps not everything ever will be. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, like the Enuma Elish, also describe a cosmic battle before the formation of the world we know. Some scholars believe these myths may be distorted memories of real events that the burned scroll once recorded accurately. If the scroll contained similar accounts about wars in heaven, rebellious beings, and destroyed worlds, then its destruction might have been seen as necessary to prevent confusion between divine truth and pagan traditions. Yet the similarities are too striking to ignore, suggesting they may all trace back to a single, hidden source. The possibility of earlier creations is also hinted at in Jewish mystical writings, which speak of multiple worlds being created and destroyed before the one we inhabit. These teachings, though never made part of the official canon, reflect a belief that God's creative work is far older and more complex than Genesis reveals. If the burned scroll contained these details, it would have been a revolutionary document, one that completely redefined humanity's place in the universe. Those who search for these lost fragments today face an overwhelming challenge. Much of what remains is scattered across apocryphal texts, obscure manuscripts, and oral traditions that survived persecution. But the persistence of these stories suggests that the truth refuses to stay buried. Perhaps God allowed pieces of the burned scroll to endure, leaving clues for those willing to seek them out and piece together the forgotten history of creation. If this is the case, then we must ask ourselves, why was humanity only given part of the story? Was it to protect us from truths we were not ready to face? Or was it because powerful leaders feared that full knowledge would break their control over faith and belief? The burned scroll, whether real or symbolic, stands as a haunting reminder that history is written by those who decide what must be remembered and what must be erased forever. Some early Christian sects, later declared heretical, claimed to possess teachings that went beyond the Genesis account. They spoke of divine realms, angelic lineages, and a history of creation that stretched back far before Adam. Church authorities condemned these groups, and their writings were systematically destroyed. Could these have been based on knowledge preserved from the burned scroll? If so, then silencing these voices may have been less about heresy and more about erasing forbidden history. The existence of lost books is even acknowledged in the Bible itself. References to texts like the Book of the Wars of the Lord, the Book of Jasher, and the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel suggest that Scripture once drew from a larger body of writings. Many of these are now gone. This raises the unsettling possibility that Genesis as we know it is not the full story, but a carefully chosen portion of a far greater narrative that was once recorded in the destroyed scroll. Imagine if that scroll had survived. Humanity might have a completely different understanding of God's plan, of creation's true history, and of the role of celestial beings in shaping the world. We might know what really happened before Adam, why previous worlds were destroyed, and how heaven itself was divided long before the serpent entered Eden. Such knowledge could shake the foundations of faith as we know it, and perhaps this is why it was burned. Even now, some theologians argue that pieces of this greater truth may resurface in the last days. Prophecies speak of hidden things being revealed, secrets coming to light, and knowledge increasing as history approaches its conclusion. If fragments of the burned scroll are ever found, they could confirm what ancient traditions have always hinted, that Genesis was not the beginning, but merely the part of the story we were allowed to know. The thought of a burned scroll raises one final and haunting question: who truly controls sacred history? If leaders of the past decided which parts of God's revelations would survive, then humanity's understanding of creation has always been filtered through human authority. The burned scroll might be the ultimate example of this, proof that even divine truth can be silenced when it threatens power. This possibility forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that what we know today may be only a fraction of what once existed. Some researchers believe that fragments of this scroll may still lie hidden in undiscovered caves or buried beneath ancient ruins. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls proved that texts thought lost forever can survive for thousands of years. If another cache of manuscripts were to be unearthed, it might contain pieces of the burned Genesis, revealing secrets that the world has never seen. Such a discovery would shake the foundations of religion, history, and even the way we view God himself. Others argue that God deliberately allowed the scroll to be destroyed, ensuring that certain knowledge would remain concealed until the appointed time. Perhaps humanity is not yet ready to face the full truth of creation and the events that came before our world. If that is the case, then the burned scroll represents not just a loss, but a divine act of mercy, keeping hidden a reality too overwhelming for mankind to bear. But what if the time of revelation is drawing near? The Bible speaks of mysteries being unveiled in the last days, of knowledge increasing, and of hidden things being brought to light. The burned scroll may one day be rediscovered, not in its original form, but through the gathering of every surviving fragment. And when that moment comes, humanity will finally confront the full story of creation, a story far greater, older, and more terrifying than we have ever imagined. If this day ever comes, every belief we hold about the beginning will be tested. The burned scroll could confirm that our world is just one chapter in a much larger history of creation and judgment. It could reveal that before Adam, other beings walked the earth, that heaven itself was once a battlefield, and that God's plan has always been far bigger than we imagined. Such a revelation would force us to see Scripture not as a complete record, but as the preserved portion of a much greater story. This possibility does not diminish the Bible we have today. It makes it even more profound. It reminds us that God reveals what He chooses when He chooses, and that some mysteries remain hidden until their proper time. The burned scroll, whether real or symbolic, is a reminder that divine truth is not always given in full. Sometimes what is withheld is as important as what is revealed, guiding us to trust that God knows what humanity can and cannot bear. But even in its absence, the echoes of that scroll endure. They are found in apocryphal writings, in fragments preserved by chance, and in the questions that Scripture itself leaves unanswered. These traces remind us that the story of creation is not as simple as we were taught. Something far greater, far older, lies just beyond our understanding, waiting for the day when God decides to uncover it completely. Until that moment, we are left with a haunting truth. History is incomplete, and much of what we believe may be only a shadow of the reality God once revealed. The burned scroll is a symbol of that missing truth, an ancient record erased to protect or control humanity. And perhaps, when the appointed time comes, the full story of creation will finally be told, shaking the heavens and the earth once again. And if this journey into the forgotten truth of Genesis has stirred something in your heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next revelations. Become a member today. Your support helps us continue uncovering the mysteries hidden for millennia. Click the join button right below to bless this mission, and tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching us? We'd love to know how far this message is reaching around the world.